So we're really interested to hear a little bit more about your research and your interests. And thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. My disciplinary background is in academic philosophy and academic Western philosophy. And I'm particularly interested in pedagogies, in very much in how philosophies inform the pedagogies that we use, so how we teach and what we think teaching and learning is. So it is only the last sort of 10 years that's become much more focused on early childhood education and really, really interested in education in resource constrained environments. I studied library science and I was specialized in children's literature, and a special passion of mine is picture books, and especially because picture books as works of art do something different. It's very intergenerational, it's visual, and there are these gaps between the word and the visual, which helps us think differently about what it means to make meaning. And also children are often much more at ease with making sense of the visual. So it does something to the adult-child relation, which is very much at the heart of my current research. So I'm just sort of border crossing all the time, from literary research, philosophy in education, of education, and all these kind of very rich pedagogies, and more recently also with the digital technology and notions of digital play. I think my PhD, that might be relevant, is about the metaphors we use when we think about children's thinking. And it all started, and it might be of interest for people to hear, with this one sentence that I overheard in one of the schools, in one of the staff rooms, was, "Oh, George is a very slow thinker." And then I thought, how can thinking, in the first place, thinking slowly, why would that be a bad thing? But how come that we compare thinking with things in the world that can either go slow or fast? And then I got intrigued about the metaphors that we use when we assess children's thinking. So thinking, and of course, as a philosopher, thinking about thinking has been sort of my main focus, and also turning learning spaces into thinking spaces. So if there's one thing you can say about philosophy for children or with children, is that it is about giving children opportunity to ask questions that Google cannot answer, and getting better at asking each other questions. That is very much at the heart of my work, and normalizing disagreement, trying to feel comfortable with the fact that we shouldn't agree with each other if we really challenge each other's thinking, and that it is perfectly okay also for friends to disagree with each other, and sort of that kind of playful thinking out loud without too much investing in getting it wrong. So much of education is about getting it right. And here is like being quite happy with getting it wrong and hypothesizing and thinking out loud.
Talking about this nature and culture dichotomy, the Western philosophers had spoken so much about the origins of the child, and how much knowledge they have and where it comes from and where it goes, and these kinds of things, and the interaction between culture and what we are pushing onto the children from an educational perspective. Would you like to expand a little bit upon this idea? I think it's really fascinating.
In the Post-Human Child Manifesto, I really sort of summarize in 17 minutes what I'm very passionate about. That's why it's called a manifesto. It's a real sort of call, a cry for change. How the concept of child works to exclude and also to include, but to exclude in particular. So what is already given in lots of situations, and in particular the binaries. How are they already at work in either our pedagogies or, so through our practices and in our theories? These binaries are very closely connected. So you've got the major one, which is culture over nature. So that whole idea that we are not part of nature, but that we are culture, and we need to tame and cultivate the wild, unsophisticated, underdeveloped, and basically children of humankind. That is, the people, the savages, the prehistorical humans who didn't have civilization, etc. And still, how the concept or the logic of childhood works to still talk about groups of people as underdeveloped. So the whole thing of developed nations and developed children, and the similarities, so that the logic of childhood is also the logic of colonialism. And so it goes much further back than just the way in which countries have been colonized. It is the whole root of the colonization is in the kind of binaries we already think with. And culture nature is a very important one also now with the Anthropocene. And are we seeing and understanding ourselves as separate from nature or as part of nature, and how we have positioned ourselves not only in Western philosophy and the binary logic of Western philosophy, but also religion and Western religions. Now, why is that important for education? Is that through educational curricula, we also assume that there is a world out there. So when we look at worksheets and textbooks, we teach children to use concepts that are about the world. And we teach in a way that doesn't involve them physically in that world that they are learning. So it's always about, they learn the signs of the world. So they learn about snails, but they can do a whole project on snails and never touch a snail. And it might actually get the snails into the classroom. Then it would still be in a way that we are the humans and that we are superior beings that have a kind of intellect that is superior to that of animals, and especially, the really small, underdeveloped animals that are very unlike humans. So we use human intelligence as the marker of what it means to be intelligent and also therefore worthwhile. So when we think about post-humanism, or my interest in post-humanism is troubling that kind of human exceptionalism and putting ourselves at the heart of what we do, how we teach, of our ethics, of our politics. So one of the things that I'm at the moment really theorizing is the notion of responsible science. So how can we do science that includes opportunities for the other than human and the other than the fully human to also respond? So when we say do research in a classroom, we tend to focus on the children, on the teacher, we transcribe tapes, we do focus interviews. But actually what we don't take into account is the sound of the cockerels outside, the wind, the snot, the sweat, the emotions, how children are affected because there is a football tournament going on. That is not just for some, in the background. That is actually part of what's going on. So if you want to do justice to the complexity of any moment in time, what's always already threaded through is atmosphere, national curricula, how to do research, what you have learned as count as real research, what is objective research, what is a research site. And it is that I'm particularly interested in when we think about post-humanist research. So it is doing justice to the complexity more of a world that we are only part of. Yeah, and also how the technology very much is part of that. So some of the research I've done is using 3 different angles. So one of them, I found myself on the floor, which was in a book, Literacies, Literature and Learning. And what was incredibly interesting was how the children's feet were responding differently to the reading of the story than the faces. So it's not that children are not important, but it is perhaps, looking at things that we normally don't look at when we, but also how the technology already makes research possible, because then afterwards you go over it again and again and again, and you go through the videos and you notice new things.
If I could ask a little bit about the significance of your work and what you perhaps you're hopeful about for teachers or for teacher education to pull from your research.
Yeah, I mean, I think the importance or significance of my work is drawing attention to how these binaries are already at work in our teaching and in our research, educational research, and that childhood is not something that is just something for children, but that I also am still child. And with that comes opportunities for learning from children in the way that they are part of the world, in their thinking, their animistic thinking that we are so desperately trying to educate them out of. What is it we can learn from children in terms of, by listening to them, in the way we make meaning and the respect or lack of it that we have for the world that we are part of. There is an Institute of Childism, and I'm really excited about the work they do. Is really not seeing childism as something that's negative, but childism as a powerful force to bring to people's attention and awareness how we exclude children in situations, and how we, through our figurations of childhood as being innocent, as incompetent, basically, as immature. And these are all words we're very familiar with. And it puts us as adults in roles of, having to maturate and protect and facilitate and mediate and diagnose. And so just create that awareness of how the child-adult or adult-child binary works, to do enormous epistemic injustice. So I'm hoping that the work I do and the research I do is a really strong force against these developmental theories, which are still so at the heart of our curricula, national curricula, that very often those figurations of childlike, of innocence, that they see them as descriptive rather than normative. They have been enculturated to see themselves as fragile, as immature, and having lack of experience, and how that has left marks on bodies and continues to do so. And you see it very much with fragility as well. So the resilience actually of children, and how much we can learn from and with them. At the same time, not forgetting, although it's hard to not be impatient, forgetting how deeply ingrained those prejudices are in the way we think about children and childhood. But I'm convinced that when we look at the history of ideas, that we are in a very exciting moment in the history of ideas, where I think at last child really is on the agenda in terms of liberation, actually. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
Okay, thank you.